Hello, and welcome to Ancient Text Podcast. We're now on Book 6 of Historia Regum Britanniae. We left off the previous section of the text with Maximian having been killed in Rome. Gratian, hearing about this, seized the crown of Britain and made himself king. He was such an awful tyrant, the common people of Britain outright just murdered him. If you remember last section, those guys who killed those virgins, those guys Geoffrey said were Picts and Huns, who were chasing Ireland, well, they were still there. And hearing about this political turmoil in Britain, they invaded, and brought with them Scots, Norwegians, and Dacians. They wreaked havoc on the whole kingdom of Britain. It was very brutal, so the Brythonic people sent out messages for help to Rome. Desperate, the Britons promised to remain subjects of Rome forever if they would just come and help take these barbarians off their backs. The Romans, forgetting recent transgressions by Britain, sent out one legion to help them. They were able to fight off the barbarians, and they built yet another wall. I assume this is referring to the Antonine Wall, as Hadrian's Wall, I think, is the one they were mentioning earlier in this book. The Antonine Wall is further north than Hadrian's Wall. It's practically in Scotland, but like Hadrian's Wall, it extends the entire width of the island. Scotland was almost totally destroyed by the remaining barbarians, so they were very eager to work on a new wall. And some of the funds came out of private accounts, private pockets. They were so eager to build it. After this, the Romans told the Britons, hey, this isn't our job. You're having us send our army regulars halfway across the world to save you from pirates. This isn't okay. You guys need to form your own army. After they said this, they commanded all war-worthy Britons to assemble in London, and Gwythylen, by Roman orders, gave the following speech. Quote, though I'm appointed by the princes here present to speak to you, I find myself rather ready to burst into tears than to make an eloquent oration. It is a most sensible affliction to me to observe the weak and destitute state into which you are fallen since Maximian drew away with him all the forces and youth of his kingdom. You that were left were people wholly inexperienced in war, and occupied with other employments, like tilling the ground, and mechanical trades. So when your enemies from foreign countries came upon you, as sheep wandering without a shepherd, they forced you to quit your folds, until the Roman power restored you to them again. Must your hopes therefore always depend upon foreign assistance? And will you never use yourselves to handle arms against a band of robbers that are by no means stronger than yourselves, if you are dispirited by sloth and cowardice? The Romans are tired of the continual voyages wherewith they are harassed to defend you against your enemies. They rather choose to remit you the tribute you pay them than undergo any more of this long travel by land and sea, because you are only the common people at a time when we had soldiers of our own. Do you therefore think that manhood has quite forsaken you? Are not men in the course of human generation often a reverse of one another? Is not a plowman often the father of a soldier, and a soldier of a plowman? Does not the same diversity appear in a mechanic and a soldier? Since then, in this manner, one produces another. I cannot think it possible for manhood to be lost among them. As then you are men, behave yourselves like men. Call upon the name of Christ that he may inspire you with courage to defend your liberties. End quote. At this speech, the crowd shouted as if they were encouraged by the heavens themselves. There was a Roman history, a similar. Basically, the difference described in Roman history is that it was a letter. It was just a letter they sent. They didn't actually come help the last time they asked for help. Anyways, back with the book. After this, the Romans encouraged the people as much as they could and left them designs for weapons. They also commanded towers to be built along the south coast, where they suspected barbarian invasions would usually come from. Geoffrey now injects the proverb, it is easier to make a hawk out of a kite than a scholar out of a plowman. And all learning to him is but as a pearl thrown before a swine. Instantly after the Romans left, Ganius and Melga, still in Ireland, started to attack. With barbarian bands of Scots, Picts, Norwegians, Dacians, and others, they took Albania/Scotland and all the way down to the wall. Understanding that the Romans were gone, like forever, the barbarians act more cruel and violent than ever before. Britons upon the battlements of the walls sat night and day with quaking hearts, more ready to run than to fight. In the meantime, the enemies attacked the walls with hooks, pulling down guards to the ground to die in pieces. Geoffrey said these guards were lucky as they wouldn't have to witness any of the coming terrors. Geoffrey says this was punishment from God for Maximian being stupid or crazy, as he, of course, had drained the country of men in general. If the men had stayed in Britain, they could, have their island in peace with the army they could have, but the men being scattered all around the world now due to his empire, they couldn't come help. Now all who were left were ne'er-do-wells. So the men stationed at the walls and towers fled, and people fled cities in fear, resulting in even worse slaughter than last time, like lambs before wolves. The Britons were torn apart by the barbarians. Again, the remaining Britons sent letters to the Roman politician Agitius and said to Agitus, "Thrice counsel the groans of the Britons, and latter, the sea drives us to the barbarians, and the barbarians drive us to the sea. Thus we are tossed to and fro between two kinds of death, drowning or the sword." Regardless of their pleas, they didn't receive any help. Diplomats returned to Britain, saying it just wasn't going to happen. Now, Gwythelic, Archbishop of London, went to Brittany, or Armorica, and asked assistance of their kin. At that time, Aldreon reigned, being the fourth king after Conan, and of course Maximian gave this bloodline their kingdom in the first place. Aldreon was excited to see the bishop had come and asked why he had. The bishop responded, quote, "Your Majesty can be no stranger to the misery which we, your Britons, have suffered, which may even demand your tears, since the tithe that Maximian drained our islands to its soldiers, to people the kingdom which you enjoy, and which, God grant, you may long enjoy in peace. For against us, the poor remains of the British race, all the people of the adjacent island have risen up, and made an utter devastation in our country, which then abounded with all kinds of riches, so that the people are now wholly destitute of all manner of sustenance, but can get what they can get in hunting. Nor have we any power or knowledge or military affairs left among us to encounter the enemy. The Romans are tired of us and have absolutely refused their assistance, so that now, deprived of all other, we come hoping to find clemency in your power, that you would furnish us with forces and protect the kingdom, which is of right your own from the incursions of barbarians. For who but yourself ought to your consent wear the crown of Constantine and Maximian, since it's the right by your ancestors, and is now devolved upon you? Prepare now your fleet and go with me. Behold, I deliver the kingdom of Britain into your hands." End quote. To this Aldreon answered, "There was time formerly when I would have not refused to accept the island of Britain if it had been offered, for I do not think there was any more a fruitful country while it enjoyed peace, but now, since these calamities, it has become less valuable and odious to me and any other prince. But above all things, the power of the Romans was so destructive to it that nobody could enjoy any settled state or authority in it without loss of liberty and bearing the yoke of slavery under them. And who would not prefer the possession of a lesser country of liberty to all the riches of the island and servitude? The kingdom that is now under my subjection I enjoy with honor, and without paying homage to any superior, so that I prefer it to all other countries, since I can govern it without being controlled. Regardless, out of respect to the right that my ancestors for many generations have had to your islands, I deliver to you my brother Constantine, with 2,000 men, that with the providence of God, he may free your country from the inroads of barbarians and obtain the crown for himself. My brother, who goes by that name, is an expert soldier, and in all other respects an accomplished man. If you please to accept him, I will not refuse to send him to you, together with a said number of men, for indeed a larger number I do not mention to you, because I am daily threatened with war made on me from the Gauls." End quote. The second he had stopped speaking, the archbishop said that, "Sounds great, thanks." So they called in Constantine, and when he heard the news, broke out into these expressions of joy. He said, "Christ conquers, Christ commands, Christ reigns. Behold the King of desolate Britain. Be Christ only present, and behold our defense, our hope, and our joy." And so they got ships ready, and men from all over the kingdom were prescribed to embark to Britain. Christ conquers sounds extremely close to the quote coined elsewhere by the other Constantine in history that was also in this book, the Roman the emperor who made Christianity big in the first place, the one in the Da Vinci Code, that guy. This comes across to me as very strange that a Constantine Constantine quote is like being attributed to a different character named Constantine. After covering an alternate history of the former Constantine that we know from, what is the motive for this? After some thought and research, I come up with this. When we look at mainstream history, the Emperor Constantine indeed has some tie-in with Britain, in that he resided there much of the time. And the time frame we're talking about is when Constantius III, who may have been a Briton, rose to power first in Britain and was declared Roman Emperor in Roman Britain, and was successful enough in the ensuing military challenges that he did, according to Roman histories, actually at some point legally become a co-emperor of the Roman Empire. But what sounds cooler? A guy came from our country, became one of the most famous and religiously influential emperors ever, or a guy named after that guy came from our country and kind of became an emperor halfway? It's also not hard to imagine someone saying Constantius came from Britain to become that famous guy Constantine came from Britain, So maybe either the material Geoffrey is taking from, or Geoffrey himself is conflating the two on purpose, trying to do both characters justice in this naturalistic way. As this book, Constantius does not become a Roman co-emperor, just a big king. And a Brythonic origin to the Roman Constantine is given. A trade-off between the characters happens where they have to downplay Constantius' accomplishments because his story is it's like the mimetic origin of the idea of a Brythonic nativity of the Emperor Constantine. But to do Constantius justice, they give him one of Constantine's cool quotes, Christ conquers, or in the sun conquer. But of course, don't take me too seriously. I'm not a professional. Back to the book. Constantine, the latter one, the one we were just referring to as Constantius, the guy, is the brother of the guy the guy the story's about, not the old one, prepared to set out to Britain, and he arrived at the port of Totnes. Without delay, he assembled any remaining young men, and they went to fight the barbarians who had took over the island, and Constantine won. Geoffrey says Jesus helped. After this, the Britons held council at Silchester and advanced Constantine to the throne. They crowned him at the same council. And he was married to a noblewoman who's of a Roman lineage and a student of Archbishop Guithelin. The king then had 3 sons, Constans, Aurelius Ambrosius, and Uther Pendragon. Constans, who was the oldest, became a monk at the church in Winchester. Aurelius and Uther were educated by Guithelin. 10 years later, a Pictish man who had joined Constantine's armed forces got the king alone under a false pretenses and killed him with a dagger. Apparently, the place the king was lured to was a nursery for trees. Young ones, a nursery. And I think this might have some symbolic meaning, but I'm going to leave that to your interpretation. After Constantine was killed, the nobility couldn't agree what to do. Some wanted to crown Aurelius Ambrosius, others wanted Uther Pendragon, or others wanted someone else. This debate seemed pretty gridlocked, so Vortigern, who was the consul for the Gaiusians, who was also very ambitious for more power, went to Constans, the monk, who of course would be the obvious choice for a king because he was the firstborn anyways. Vortigern said to him, "Your father is dead, and your brothers are too young to take the crown, and the way I see it, you're the obvious choice for the crown. So listen to my plan. If you give me more property than I already have, I will sway the people, and you will be crowned king." This whole premise, by the way, Vortigern is going to be a character for like a billion years. And this is where he starts out, and the premise is so nuts because Constans probably just could have took the crown. He was the oldest son of the king anyways. He probably could have done it himself. Vortigern's like, "Bro, I'm going to help you out." And yeah, got him to agree, and that's how anyways. So Constans was overjoyed at his proposal, and he promised to give Vortigern anything if he was to be made king, some monk. So Vortigern took him, dressed him up as a king, and brought him to London, and made him king. Though not everyone was cool with it. Archbishop Guithelin was dead by this time, and no other bishops would do the coronation because Constans had quit the monastic order, which is nuts to become king. That's flagrantly nuts. So Vortigern, not a bishop, did the coronation himself. Constans, now king, gave supreme executive power of the kingdom to Vortigern. He himself took orders from Vortigern, so basically Vortigern was the king in a pragmatic sense. This was to be expected because Constans didn't really have any experience with government. He was a forsook monk. Vortigern noticed this and started plotting to become king in name, and not just in practice. He saw his chance. Vortigern controlled everything. Constans was a shadow of a king. Constans had a soft temper, but also an awful sense of judgment to not match. And nobody feared him, locally or in other nations. Uther and Aurelius were still children and not capable to rule. Further, the older class nobles were all dead except Vortigern, and he was the only one fully capable of government anyways. Lots of the current nobles were fatherless due to the previous war and thus not very capable men. Vortigern saw this was his chance and thought of a way to kill Constans and take his place. First, he made sure he had friends in other countries, and then he started a rumor that nearby islands were planning to invade, and he told Constans to hand over several cities and fortifications so that he could get ready for the false invasion. Then, one day, Vortigern went to ask Constans for more local troops. "Have I not left all things at your disposal?" asked Constans. "Do what you will after that, so that they be but faithful to me." Vortigern replied, "I am informed that the Picts are going to bring the Dacians and Norwegians in upon us, with a design to give us every great annoyance. I would therefore advise you, and in my opinion is the best course you could take, that you maintain some Picts in your court, who may do you good service among those of that nation. For if it is true that they're preparing to begin a rebellion, you may employ them as spies on their own countrymen in their plots and stratagems, so you get away from them." I did that part verbatim. We're doing lots of this verbatim. We're getting close to like Arthur and stuff, so it all kind of gets way more relevant to the actual famous parts of this book. So we're doing a lot more things verbatim, if you couldn't tell. Mostly like quotes, mainly quotes. Anyways, we're getting close to Arthur. Next episode, next section. Two sections, 2 episodes from, because the next one it's just a big poem, and so I'm just gonna read that. And when I say it verbatim, and when I say I'm going to read it, I'm going to make it more. The translation I have is kind of old-timey English. Not old-timey, it's like early 20th century, but it still comes across because the Latin translation is extremely old-timey and like biblical almost. So I try to make it a little bit less that. But yeah, expect the next episode fast. Faster than usual. Anyways, to the book. Anyways, so what Vortigern did was treason because he knew how crazy Picts are, the Pictish people. They know how they love to kill British kings. This way Vortigern gets away with kind of seeming innocent. He just kind of invited some Picts in, and then he could take the throne nice and smooth like, because, he was king anyways, basically. So he wrote to Scotland and said, "Hey, send us like 100 Pictish soldiers," and he let these soldiers move into the king's estate. Vortigern then spoiled these Picts like wild, to the point they wanted him to be king. Vortigern, when by these practices had made these soldiers literally his own soldiers, went to them when they were drunk. He lied and told them that he may have to leave the country because his estate was only large enough to maintain a retinue of 50 men, and he needed a larger one. He pretended to be sad and then went back to his quarters. The Picts were made very sad by this, thinking he was telling the truth, murmuring to each other, "Why do we suffer this monk to live? Why do we not kill him, that Vortigern may enjoy the crown? Who is so fit to succeed as he? A man so generous to us, he is worthy to rule and deserves all the honor and dignity that we can bestow upon him." So they broke into Constans' bedchamber and killed him. They brought the head to Vortigern, and Vortigern fake cried. He acted like it was a travesty and commanded the assassins to be bound and beheaded. Should have saw that coming. Some people were suspicious that this had been a conspiracy all along. The Picts were working for Vortigern. Others asserted his innocence. With any doubt present, the handlers of Ambrosius and Uther Pendragon decided to bring them to Armorica, fearing that they would be killed by the now King Vortigern in a succession type thing. They were received by King Budes, who took care to give them a royal education. Vortigern, seeing the coast was clear, now crowned himself. I'd like to point out, Vortigern first crowned Constans himself after not being able to get an archbishop or bishop to do it, and now Vort is just crowning himself. Talk about a total coup. Everyone saw right through Vortigern's conspiracy, and the Pictish admixture of Picts and other European people they had brought there were pissed. As their comrades, they were put to death by the man who he had tricked them, So The Pictish military in general were dead set on killing Vortigern. Vortigern eventually was barely managing to hold off the Picts. He was stressing. He had lost half his army, and even then he had to worry about Armorica and the brothers of Constance who had fled there, Uther and Aurelius, who apparently are now adults. Time frames are really vague in this part of the book. Vortigern had heard that they had reached adulthood, written in this book as man's estate, and were preparing a fleet to come back to the kingdom, which is now undoubtedly theirs by right. Oh, this is my third time reading this book, and I have totally forgot that this book covers Hengist and Horsa. Okay, so Horsa and Hengist are considered to be myths by modern scholarly consensus. The name Horsa, of course, means horse, and Hengist means stallion. This is Old English we're talking, so imagine kind of like horse and horser, horses, Hengist, horsest. Anyways, this seems a little bit too on the nose for like an Indo-European culture to claim to have two founders that were both named Horse, who were also symbolized by horse-based art. They're mentioned in the books of Bede, and Hengist makes appearances in both Beowulf and in the Icelandic Prose Edda. Scholarly consensus insists that the account we're about to hear is the same as Bede's, just expanded upon further. This book is purposely discredited all the time, which is why we're hours into this thought experiment where we try to take it seriously and try to pull some knowledge out of it. Anyways, so enter stage right, Hengist and Horsa and Anglo-Saxon society. The two brothers Hengist and Horsa landed in Kent with 3 galleys full of armed men under their command. Vortigern was at Dora Bernia, modern Canterbury. Informed of the Germanic people's landing, he said that they should be met peaceably and brought to him. When they came, he noticed the brothers were being tall and graceful. After looking down the company, Vortigern asked where they were from and why they came. Hengist, being the oldest and wisest, made this answer. Quote, "Most noble king, Saxony, one of the countries of Germany, was the place of our birth, and the occasion of our coming was to offer our service to you or some other prince. We were driven out of our native country for no other reason than the laws of said kingdom required it. It is customary among us that when we come to be overstocked with people, our princes from all the provinces meet together and command all the youths of the kingdom to assemble before them. Casting lots, they choose the strongest and ablest of them to go into foreign nations, to procure themselves a living, and to free their own country from problems caused by overpopulation. So one of these events happened recently, as we were overpopulated. So the soldiers before you are the youth that had been chosen to be sent out, and we were appointed as their generals, as had our direct ancestors had been in previous times these events happened. And we are obliged to obey the custom of old. So we set out to the sea, and by the guidance of Mercury, we have arrived here in your kingdom." End quote. The king, hearing them mention Mercury, looked earnestly upon them and asked them what religion they held. Hengist said, "We worship our country's gods, Saturn and Jupiter, and the other deities that govern the world, but especially Mercury, who in our language we call Woden," which in modern English is, of course, Odin, "and to whom our ancestors assigned the 4th day of the week, Woden's Day, modern Wednesday. Next to him, we worship the powerful goddess Freya, to whom they dedicated the 6th day, which we call Friday." Vortigern replied, "For your credulity, or incredulity, I am aggrieved," meaning he's sad they're not Christians. "But I rejoice at your arrival, which, whether by God's providence or some other agency, comes right in time for me and my present difficulties. I am faced by enemies on every side. If you fight my wars with me, I will entertain you honorably in my kingdom, and give you land and other possessions." The barbarians accepted his offer, and the agreement being ratified, they resided at his court. Soon after this, the Picts, coming forth from Albania with a huge army, started to destroy the north of Britain. When Vortigern heard about this, he assembled his forces and met the enemy army on the other side of the Humber. The battle was very fierce, though the Britons didn't have to do much because the Saxons fought so valiantly. The enemy, previously major challenge, was speedily forced to flee. Vortigern knew that he owed his victory to the Anglo-Saxons, so he increased their pay and gave Hengist large possessions of land in Lindesia, or modern Lindsey. Hengist, who was a man of experience and subtlety, finding how much he had invested with the king, addressed him in this manner: "Sir, your enemies give you disturbance from all quarters, and few of your subjects love you. They all threaten you, and say they're going to bring over Aurelius Ambrosius from Armorica to depose you and make him king. If you will, let us send word to our country to invite over more soldiers. that with our forces increased, we may be able to oppose them. But there is one thing which I would desire of your clemency, if I did not fear you refusing. Vortigern in turn says, send your messengers to Germany and invite whom you please, and you shall have no refusal from me in whatever you desire. That's really bad negotiating. No, I'll give you anything, man. Anyways, Hengist bowed and thanked Vortigern, and then said, the possessions which you have given me in land and horses are very large, but you have not yet done me that honor which becomes my station and birth, because, among other things, I should have some town or city granted to me, that I might be entitled to greater esteem among the nobility of your kingdom. I ought to have been made a consul or a prince, since my ancestors enjoyed both those dignities. It is not in my power, replied Vortigern, to do you so much honor, because you are strangers and pagans. Neither am I so far acquainted with your manners and customs as to set upon a level with my natural-born subjects. I should not be forward to do so, because the nobility of my kingdom would strongly dissuade me from it. Hengist replied, give your servant only so much ground in the place that you have assigned me as I can encompass with a leather thong, for to build a fortress upon, as a place for retreat if occasion should require. For I will always be faithful to you, as I hitherto, and pursue no other design in the request which I have made. The king agreed to this, and subsequently Hengist took a bull's hide and carved the entire thing into one long thong, one long leather strip, with which he surrounded a rocky place he had chosen carefully, and began to build a castle. It was afterwards, in the Brythonic tongue, called Carcore, in the Saxon tongue, a Thancaster, or modern English, Thong Castle. In the meantime, Hengist's messengers returned from Germany. They brought with them 18 ships full of the best soldiers they could find. They also brought with them Rowan, the daughter of Hengist, one of the most notable beautiful women of the time. Hengist invited King Vortigern to come check out the castle and the new fighting men he had brought over. The king accepted, but he went in secret. He commended Hengist on his buildings and enlisted the German men who had been brought over into his service. A banquet was thrown for the king, and when that was over, Hengist's daughter came out of her room bearing a golden cup full of wine. She approached the king, and doing a curtsy, she then said, drink Heil. The king was taken back by her beauty, and had to ask for a translation, as of course these Saxons were speaking Old Saxon or Old English, and Vortigern didn't speak English. He spoke the Brythonic tongue, common Brythonic, that had inhabited Britain for thousands of years. That's one thing I feel lots of people don't quite get. If say King Arthur existed, we'll get to him soon. He spoke a Celtic tongue, not the language we speak now. King Arthur is a part of the English culture, like Geronimo or Crazy Horse were parts of American culture. They were defenders from a new culture that would come and push them into smaller settlements, basically. Now, let's think Indian reservations or Wales. Wales, of course, being where the original Brythonic people were culturally reduced to, and genetically. Anyways, where we're at in the book right now is the beginning of the Anglo-Saxons invading Britain. Though even then, in time, the English would occasionally be vanquished by Norwegians or Normans or the French. What language are we speaking right now? In this book, we're witnessing right now the birth of the culture that would spawn what would be the largest empire, the now defunct British Empire, and the language English, a lingua franca, a universal language, thanks to the internet. All of this may have began with these events we're reading about in this book right now. But as we said earlier, many believe Hengist and Horsa were a myth, despite being attested to in several other histories. Some believe that the Anglo-Saxon invasion wasn't very bloody, though it's kind of a fringe thought. For me, linguistics has proven it. Very few native to Britain Celtic words made it to the English language. If I'm not mistaken, English has more loan words from Hindu than from Welsh. This would not suggest polite cultural assimilation, or even just being made a subject of the Anglo-Saxon. This would suggest the Britons were forcefully displaced and segregated. Anyways, what we're seeing in this book. So Hengist's daughter, the story we were just at, Hengist's daughter, he came out to the ultimate asshole king of the Britons, Vortigern, and she speaks early English to him and says, drink Heil. Vortigern asks his translator what this means, and the translator says, he says it means drink to your health. So Vortigern in turn said, drink Heil, cheers her. He then took the cup from her, kissed her, and drank. Geoffrey says that in his time, it, it was still because of this common to cheers by saying Wacht Heil, which I'd say probably means either wish health, or another source is telling me it means be whole. And the person you're toasting would respond with drink Heil. So wish health and drink health is the way I'd see it. Geoffrey now tells us because Vortigern was drunk, he was vulnerable to Satan himself. And that with Satan in his heart, he fell in love with this pagan woman and pursued marrying her. Hengist, being a prudent guy, noticed the king's levity and consulted with his brother Horsa and other old men present what to do in relation to the king trying to marry Rowan. They all said offer her over to him and demand in exchange the province of Kent. Without delay, the daughter was delivered to Vortigern, and the province of Kent was delivered to Hengist. This was done without the knowledge of Gorngen, who was the current governor of the province. The king the same night married the pagan woman and was delighted with her. All the nobles were kind of disgusted by this, and remember, he's already not popular because everyone knows he's a snake-ass motherfucker. Even his 3 sons named Vortimer, Cadogan, and Pacientius hated him over this. Around the same time, the bishops Germanus and Lupus came to realign the Christian faith the Britons had developed back with the hardline Catholic doctrine. Geoffrey, being a Catholic priest, of course, frames it like he would be, being a Catholic priest. They came to preach the gospel to the Britons, for the Christian faith had been corrupted among them, partly by the pagans, who the king brought into society, and partly by the Pelagian heresy, a poison they were, quote, long infected with, end quote. Pelagius, of course, was a Christian monk who existed about 500 years before this time. He insisted that humans are actually inherently good, contradicting the idea of original sin. That's very important in Christianity, and urged individual asceticism as opposed to asceticism living as a monk in a monastery. Geoffrey says, by their preaching the true faith, worship was again restored. The many miracles they wrought, giving success to their labors. Geoffrey says Gildas has, in his elegant writing, given an account of their many miracles. It's funny how this book, Geoffrey kind of pokes fun at Gildas and Bede, but he also kind of advertises for them for free. Says, hey, go read about this in Gildas and Bede, instead of me having to write anything. I don't want to cover this part. Go read Gildas and Bede. Anyways, back to the kings. Vortigern was, of course, now married to Hengist's daughter. So Hengist came around and said, hey man, I'm your father-in-law, so I demand to be your advisor. And as your advisor, I advise that you bring over from Germany my son Octa and his brother Abessa, and give them countries in the far north bits of Britain by the wall, probably meaning Hadrian's Wall, and they could hinder any barbarians from coming in, so that the other side of the Humber will finally be peaceful. Vortigern complied, and said, invite whoever you think can help me. So came Octa and Abissa and Sherdic, with 300 ships filled with soldiers, who were kindly received and paid by Vortigern, and they helped Vortigern take on all his enemies successfully. Hengist kept inviting more and more men and soldiers, increasing his retinue daily. The Britons didn't like this. They were wary that they may be betrayed by the Saxons, so they appealed to the king. These were all, after all, pagan men, and Christian native Britons wanted nothing to do with them. Also, pagan and Christians were intermarrying now, resulting in lots of blurred lines as to who were or weren't Christians. The king, who was himself married to a pagan, didn't listen to the masses who were scared. So the masses set up Vortigern's son Vortimer, who was from a former wife, of course, as a claimant to the throne. Vortimer actively engaged in an effort to drive out pagans from Britain via warfare. 4 battles were fought, and Vort Jr., Vortimer, won them all. The first took place on the river Derwent. There's a second battle at the fort of Epsford. Horsa and Cadogan, another son of Vortigern, met, the two of them killing each other. The third battle happened at the seashore, with the Saxons fleeing shamefully into their ships. The Saxons then fled from there to the Isle of Thanet, where they were besieged by Vortimer's fleet. Being almost wiped out from the besiegement, the Saxons sent out old Vortigern, who had been present for all these battles, to talk to his son and negotiate him and his Saxons a safe return to Germany. Vortigern had been reduced from a king to a diplomat for a foreign nation in 3 battles. The Saxons fled, only the men, leaving behind women and children. Young Vortimer, after this victory, began to give land back to his native subjects, which his father had placed in the Saxon hands. He showed his subjects great affection and esteem. The book at this point mentions Vortimer and something about Saint Germanus and building churches that it reads totally incoherent. I checked for other translations. I can only find one other translation, and it's in heavily Latinized German, and it seems to not have this part at all. It's because this is at the beginning of a chapter, and then it's just not there. I spent 40 minutes researching this to no avail. So let's just say what it says in the book verbatim. It says, and Vortimer, at the insistence of Saint Germanus, to rebuild their churches. It sounds like a typo. Let's assume it means Vortimer, at the insistence of Saint Germanus, helped to rebuild their churches. Geoffrey says that Vortimer was such a good guy that the devil himself decided to take him out via his pagan stepmother, Rowan. Really just seems like an untied loose end. I mean, they kicked out all the pagans and the king, but not the king's pagan wife. Anyways, so Rowan bribed one of the king's courtesans and eventually convinced him to bring him a poisoned drink. And the heroic King Vortimer, Vort Jr., drank it. He soon realized he was dying, so he called his soldiers, and because he loved his soldiers so much, he gave them the royal treasury. His men were very sad that he was dying, and he comforted them, saying, "It's the way of all flesh." He exhorted his men, who had accompanied him in so many victories, to continue to defend the country against hostile outside invaders. And then he commanded a pyramid built at the port where the Saxons had first landed, and for his body to be placed on the pyramid, as to frighten the Saxons in any future attempts of landing at that port. The man endeavored to not only terrorize his enemies in life, but also death. After he died, his soldiers ignored his orders, and he was buried at London. Now, with Vort Jr. dead, Vortigern came back and became king again. His wife had sent a message saying, "Coast is clear, just come with a small retinue of men so you don't cause any drama." Hengist had heard about Vortimer's death and subsequently assembled an army of 300,000 men and sailed to Britain. Vortigern was incensed that there was a full-blown invasion seemingly happening from his so-called friend, so he decided to fight off his old ally. Hengist was informed via spies, via his daughter, of the counterattack, so Hengist entered deliberation as to what he should do. Eventually, they sent an embassy that would lie and say that they thought Vort Jr. was still alive and that they just came prepared in case they had to fight him, and asked for a council with the king and the people of Britain to see if they would all agree to take in the Saxons again, and that they were totally at Vortigern's disposal. Vortigern was excited to hear this news because Hengist was his old friend after all, so they agreed to a meeting outside the monastery of Ambrius. Hengist, on the fly, thought up a plot that all his men should hide daggers in their sleeves, and in the meeting, Hengist would say, "Nemet our saxes," which is Old English for get our knives, which seems like an obvious signal, but remember, the actual natives of Britain did not speak English. Saxes. Saxons. Their name given by ancient historians literally means knife people. Events like this could be why. So the meeting happened, and eventually Hengist did yell, "Nemet our saxes," and they fell upon the princes and nobility, totally by surprise, killing 460 barons and consuls of Britain, who were afterwards buried by St. Eldad in modern Salisbury near the monastery of Ambrius. It ultimately wasn't a total loss, as the Brythonic countrymen eventually resolved to use branches and stones to fight, because of course they came unarmed, and they ended up doing some damage to the envoys Saxons that were present, killing many of them. I should point out, as I have before in this book, this is flagrantly barbaric, even by ancient standards, to use diplomacy as a violent trap. After this battle, the consul Gloucester, Eldol, found a piece of wood and made a valiant defense. With every swing of his big piece of wood, he took a life, crushing people's bones. He stoked great terror in the treacherous Saxons, and he stood his ground, killing 70 men. Eventually, he was overwhelmed and escaped to return to his home city. The Saxons, armed and having the element of surprise on their side, won the battle but still lost many men. After this had occurred, the captured Vortigern was not killed right away, but threatened with death unless he would hand over his cities and fortifications. Vortigern, being Vortigern, granted them anything they wanted. The Saxons made him take an oath. They released him and marched on London. Imagine being a citizen under this old, incompetent king. His son ruled and died. That's how old he is. He's been around for a long time, and he always just makes awful decisions. How frustrating. After London, the Saxons took York, Lincoln, and Winchester, making waste of land everywhere they went, and killing people like wolves kill livestock. Vortigern went to Cambria, or modern Wales, to think of what to do against such a rapacious people. Vortigern consulted magicians as to what he should do, and they said he should build a tower because, no brainer, he had no fortifications, so one would be nice. Vortigern set out to find where to build this tower, and he found a spot near Mount Eryr, which is a name for modern Mount Snowdon, the highest mountain in Britain, at 3,500 feet high. That's not a really big mountain, but it's for Britain, it's a big mountain. Vortigern's builders laid a foundation for the tower, and they sank. And again, and again, and again, and again. Every day, all progress made on the structure was swallowed by the earth. Vortigern once again asked his magicians what to do. They said Vortigern had to sacrifice a fatherless child and then sprinkle the foundation of the tower with his blood, and then the foundation would be firm. Yikes. So messengers were set out to find a fatherless child. Some messenger sat down in a ring of children to see if he could pick up on anything, and he witnessed a scuffle. Enter Merlin. The children fighting were called Merlin and Debashius. In the fight, Debashius said, "Why would you want to fight me? I'm of royal race on both my mother and my father's side. You don't even know what you are because you never had a father." The messengers looked at Merlin and asked the bystanders who he was. And apparently his father was totally unknown, and his mother was a daughter of the king of Demetia, which would have been a medieval kingdom south of Wales. And she was a nun at St. Peter's Cathedral now, assumingly Exeter Cathedral, modern. After hearing this, the messengers hastened to the governor of the city and ordered him, in the king's name, to send young Merlin and his mother to the king. As soon as the governor understood his circumstances, he obeyed the order and sent them to Vortigern. When they were introduced to the king, Vortigern was very polite to the mother on account of her being a noble, and asked how he had been conceived. She swore to him that, quote, "I know nobody that begot him of me, only that I know that once while in my chambers there appeared to me a person in the shape of a most beautiful young man, who embraced me eagerly in his arms and kissed me. And when he had stayed a while, he suddenly vanished out of my sight. Many times after this, he would talk with me when I sat alone, without making any visible appearance. When he had for a long time haunted me in this manner, he at last lay with me several times in the form of a man, and left me with the child. And I promise you, my sovereign, other than him, I am a virgin." End quote. The king, in admiration of this account, ordered Magnentius, assumingly one of his magicians, to come and give a possible explanation. After hearing the story, Magnentius said, "In the books of our philosophers, and in a great many histories, I have heard of several men like this. For Apuleius, who was a 2nd century Neoplatonist, informs us in his book concerning the demons or spirits of Socrates, that between the moon and the earth live these spirits, which we call incubuses. These are of nature partly men and partly of angels. Whenever they please, assume human shapes and lie with women. Perhaps one appeared to this woman, and the child is begotten by such." End quote. So as portrayed here, Merlin was conceived when his mother slept with an incubus. Merlin, in the meantime, was attentive to all the conversation and then approached the king and said to him, "For what reason am I and my mother introduced to you?" And Vortigern replied, "My magicians advised me to seek out a male who had no father, with whose blood my building is out to be sprinkled with in order to stop it from sinking." Merlin quipped back, "Order your magicians to come before me, and I will convict them of a lie." The king was surprised by this and ordered his magicians to come and sit down before Merlin, who then said, quote, "Because you are ignorant what it is that hinders the foundation of the tower, you have recommended the shedding of my blood for cement, as if that would presently make us stand. But tell me now, what is there under the foundations? For something there is what is preventing it from standing." End quote. The magicians were afraid and made no answer. Then Merlin, Geoffrey points out here, an alternate name for Merlin is Ambrose, said, I entreat your majesty, would command your workmen to dig into the ground, you will find a pond, which causes the foundation to sink. This was accordingly done, and indeed, they found a deep pond underground, which indeed was the cause of the construction problems. Merlin again scorned the magicians, saying, Tell me, you false sycophants, what is there under the pond? And they were silent. Then he said again to the king, Command the pond to be drained, and at the bottom you will see 2 hollow stones, and inside them 2 dragons sleeping. The king believed the child Merlin because he was right, before, after all, once drowned, the situation was as Merlin predicted. 2 dragons slept in hollowed out stones. This is the end of book/section 6. This story will pick up right back where we're leaving off here. The next section, or book, or episode, whatever you want to call it, will be what Geoffrey acts like is his literary crown jewel of this book, Merlin's Prophecy. Next time on Ancient Text Podcast.